She spent 40 years building everything. Her daughter-in-law tried to take it all in one night. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I am 63 years old. I have survived a difficult marriage, raised a son on my own for 11 of those years, buried my mother without taking a single day off work, and built something from nothing with these two hands. I have never asked anyone for anything I didn't earn. So when I tell you that the most dangerous moment of my life happened at my own retirement party, surrounded by flowers, champagne, and people clapping for me, I need you to understand, the smile on my face that night was real. The knife behind someone else's smile was not. If this story hits home, stay with me until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this goes. I want to start by telling you what that room looked like, because the setting matters when you're trying to understand how something so ugly could hide inside something so beautiful. The Hargrove Conference Center on the 6th floor of the Meridian Building downtown. That was where my colleagues at Langston and Associates had booked the event space. 300 square feet of floor-to-ceiling windows, white tablecloths, cream-colored roses in glass vases, string lights that turned everything gold. There was a banner above the buffet table that read, "Congratulations, Evelyn. 40 years of excellence," and someone had printed it in a font that was fancy but not too fancy, the kind of font that says we respect you without being over the top. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds before anyone saw me. I needed a moment. 40 years. I kept trying to feel the weight of that number and couldn't. 40 years of 6 a.m. alarm clocks and quarterly reports and conference calls I sat through in my car because the office was too loud. 40 years of Christmas bonuses I put straight into savings, of buying off-brand cereal so I could afford my son Marcus's soccer cleats, of saying yes, ma'am, and right away, sir, to people who were sometimes younger than my shoes. And now it was over, and someone had put cream roses in glass vases for me. I should have felt peaceful. I think most people would have. Instead, something sat in my stomach that I couldn't name. Not dread exactly. More like the feeling you get when you walk into a room and you're not sure yet, but some very old, very quiet instinct is already scanning the corners. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I smoothed the front of my navy dress, lifted my chin, and walked in. Thus, the first person to reach me was Patricia Osei, my closest work friend for 22 years. She grabbed both my hands before I even made it through the door properly. "Evelyn Mercer," she said, "you look like a whole entire moment." I laughed for the first time all day. "Pat, I'm serious, that dress, those earrings. How dare you retire and look better than the rest of us who still have to come back Monday? You'll survive." "I won't." She pulled me into a hug, and for a second I just stayed there. Pat smelled like her lavender perfume, and underneath that, hair products. She'd done her braids up special for tonight. She always did things like that, small acts of care that she never made a big deal of. When she pulled back, there was something in her eyes. Not sadness exactly, something quieter. "How are you really doing?" she asked, low enough that no one else could hear. "I'm fine," I said. And then, because it was Pat, "I don't know. Ask me again in an hour." She squeezed my hand once, hard. "I'll be right here." That was the thing about Patricia. She didn't need explanations. She just showed up. Well, the room filled up fast. People I hadn't seen in years were there. Colleagues from the Dallas branch, a woman named Sandra, who'd been my assistant back in 2009 and had since moved to Atlanta and started her own company. 2 members of the original team from when Langston and Associates was still a mid-sized firm, and we all shared one printer and nobody complained. My boss, Director Gerald Whitmore. Gerald, who I had watched stumble through his first board presentation in 2011 and coach through it without him ever fully realizing I'd done it, gave a speech that was warm and a little too long and mentioned Evelyn's inimitable presence 3 times. I smiled through all of it. I'd had 40 years of practice. My son Marcus was there. 34 years old, a project manager at a tech firm, a little heavier than he'd been in his 20s, wearing a blazer that I was fairly certain Vanessa had picked out for him. He hugged me when I got close enough and said, "Oh, Mom, this place is nice." And I could tell he was genuinely pleased, and that made me genuinely happy. Because Marcus, for all our complications, for all the years when we were both too stubborn and I was too tired and he was too angry, Marcus was mine, and I loved him more than I'd ever been good at saying. "You look great, Mom," he told me. "You too, baby." I patted his arm. "Where's Vanessa?" He nodded toward the far side of the room. "She's over there. Said she wanted to check on the catering." I looked. Vanessa Hale Mercer was standing near the drinks table, talking to one of the catering staff with the specific kind of smile she wore when she wanted something from someone who didn't know her well enough to know they were being managed. It was a good smile, a practice smile, warm at the edges and completely controlled at the center. I had been watching that smile for 6 years. I knew every gear inside it. She looked up, met my eyes, and the smile shifted, opened up, got bigger, got softer. She raised her champagne glass in my direction and said, loud enough to carry, "There she is, the woman of the hour." Several people turned to look at me. Someone started clapping. The moment folded me in. I smiled back at Vanessa, and I thought, something is wrong. Let me tell you about Vanessa, because she is a person who requires context. Vanessa was 31. She had a master's degree in business communications, a talent for reading social rooms that I had always privately respected, and the kind of beauty that made people want to trust her before she'd earned it. She was not lazy. I want to be fair about that. She worked hard, dressed impeccably, and said the right things in the right rooms. She made Marcus feel seen in a way that had been good for him at first. She had energy and ambition, and she knew exactly how to make an impression. The problem with Vanessa was not that she was any of those things. The problem was that Vanessa had, over the course of 6 years, quietly and methodically turned my son into someone I sometimes didn't recognize. It had started with small things. Marcus missing Sunday dinners. Marcus saying things like, "Well, Vanessa thinks in a tone that used to be reserved for, well, my therapist says," meaning this is the authority. Don't push back. Marcus not calling for 3 weeks and then calling from his car, which I eventually understood meant Vanessa was home. Then bigger things. A conversation about my estate that came up too casually at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Vanessa asking about my financial planner, about my will, about what I was planning to do with the house, in a voice so light and pleasant you could almost miss what she was actually asking. I had answered carefully and changed the subject, and she had smiled and moved on, and I had thought about it for 3 weeks afterward. Then the loan. 14 months ago, Marcus called me, from his car, so I knew, and asked whether I could lend them $60,000. He said they'd had some unexpected expenses. He said he'd explain everything. His voice was the voice of a child asking for something he already knew was a little wrong to ask for, and I felt that in my chest the way only a mother can. I asked him what the money was for. He hesitated too long. "Marcus," I said, "talk to me. Vanessa had this investment opportunity, and we put some money into it, and it didn't work out the way we expected." "How much money?" Another pause. "A lot, Mom." I didn't give him the $60,000. I told him I loved him. I told him I would always help him if I could, but that I needed to understand what had happened before I handed over my retirement savings. He said he understood. He hung up. He didn't call again for 2 months. When he finally called back, Vanessa was in the background. I could hear her low voice prompting him. He said they'd figured it out. He said not to worry. He said Vanessa sent her love. I said thank you. I hung up. I didn't sleep well for a long time after that. So when I say I watched Vanessa at my retirement party with a specific kind of attention, you understand why. She circulated through the room beautifully. That's the only word for it. She knew when to laugh loudly and when to lean in and speak quietly. She complimented Patricia's braids in a way that made Pat smile despite herself. She told Gerald Whitmore that his speech had been so moving, and Gerald, who was 61 years old and had survived 4 corporate restructures and thought of himself as a difficult man to flatter, actually stood up a little straighter. She was good at people. She always had been, but she kept coming back to the drinks table, not to refill her glass. I would have noticed that. She'd pick something up, set it down, move a glass slightly, turn back to a conversation, drift away. Come back. I am 63 years old. I have worked in corporate environments for 4 decades, which means I have learned to see what people do when they think no one is watching. Because in those environments, everyone is watching, all the time. And the people who understand that survive, and the people who don't become cautionary stories told at retirement parties like this one. I watched Vanessa. I kept my face pleasant. I kept moving through the room. I talked to Sandra from Atlanta about her new firm and the nightmare she'd had with a vendor contract and the good feeling she'd gotten when it all resolved. I listened to young Daniel Park, who joined the team 2 years ago, tell me that he'd read every internal report I'd ever filed and that I'd taught him more about strategic communications than his whole graduate program had. That hit me harder than I expected. I had to look away for a second. But even while I was present in those conversations, even while I was genuinely moved, genuinely laughing, genuinely in the room, the part of me that had kept me alive through 40 years of navigating difficult spaces was watching the drinks table, watching Vanessa, waiting. It happened at 7:42 p.m. I know the time because I had just looked at my phone. I'd gotten a text from my sister Renee in Phoenix, who couldn't be there, and had sent a voice memo she wanted me to listen to when I had a quiet moment. And I'd glanced at the time thinking I'd step out briefly before the formal dinner portion started. 7:42 p.m. I slid my phone back into my clutch and looked up. Vanessa was standing at the champagne table. She had her back mostly to the room, not fully, not in a way that looked suspicious, but angled just enough. Her left hand rested on the table. Her right hand was moving, the angle of her wrist, the tiny fold of her body inward, the way her eyes were up and scanning the room, watching everyone except the glass in front of her. My heart went very still. She was putting something in a glass. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I have spent too many years in rooms full of people who would have liked to see me react, and I learned long ago that the most powerful thing you can do, sometimes the only thing, is to not give them the reaction they're counting on. So I stood still, and I watched, and I cataloged. The small container that went back into her clutch, the glass she straightened afterward, positioning it slightly forward among the others, the way she stepped back and rejoined a conversation with a woman from our HR department without missing a beat. I felt sick. I felt cold. I felt, underneath both of those things, a terrible clarity. Because here was what my mind was doing in that moment, even while my face stayed composed and my hands stayed at my sides. It was pulling up every conversation from the last 6 years, every uneasy dinner, every careful question about my finances, every phone call from Marcus's car, every time I'd caught Vanessa looking at me with that particular expression, the one I'd never quite been able to name. I was naming it now. Calculation. She had always been calculating the distance between where she was and what I had. I gave myself 45 seconds. I counted them. Then I walked toward the drinks table. I moved slowly, stopping twice, once to hug a former colleague who'd come in from out of town, once to admire the flower arrangement near the window that Patricia had apparently been involved in choosing. I was not in a hurry. A woman in a hurry draws attention. A woman who is simply making her way through her own party draws none. When I reached the champagne table, I looked at the glasses. Vanessa had positioned the glass near the front, slightly offset from the others, slightly more accessible, easy to hand to someone without having to reach. The kind of placement that says this one is for someone specific without saying anything at all. My glass. She had positioned it as my glass. Because everyone at this party, every person in this room, knew that when the formal toasting began, I would be handed a glass by whoever was nearest the table. And Vanessa had made sure to be that person, had probably engineered the whole evening so that she was standing in the right place at the right time, looking helpful and attentive, pressing a champagne flute into my hand and smiling. My hands were completely steady. That surprised me. I looked at the glasses. I thought for a moment. Then I picked up the one Vanessa had marked, held it at my side, moved slightly along the table, and set it back down behind one of the centerpiece flower arrangements where it was visible but not easily accessible. Then I picked up the glass next to where mine had been, moved it to the front. It was a quiet switch, the kind no one notices unless they were looking for it. I stepped back from the table. I found Patricia. "Pat," I said. My voice was quiet and very even. "I need you to stay close to me for the rest of the evening." She looked at me, really looked at me, the way she always did, seeing past the surface in that way of hers. "How close?" she asked. "Very." She didn't ask any other questions. She just moved to my side and stayed there. The formal portion of the evening began at 8. Gerald gave another speech, shorter this time, better structured, probably because I wasn't the one who had to coach him through it. There were some laughs in the right places. He talked about the institutional knowledge I carried, about the way I had shaped the communications department over 4 decades, about the 37 people I had directly mentored who were now in leadership roles across the company. 37. I hadn't known it was that many. I looked out at the room while he spoke, and I felt something I didn't have a name for. Something heavier than pride, sadder than gratitude. It was the feeling of a life's work becoming visible all at once, and realizing that it had been real, that it had mattered, and also that it was finished, and you had to go home and figure out what came next. Then Marcus stood up. He hadn't told me he was going to speak. He cleared his throat in the way he'd done since he was a teenager. Nervous habit, the way some people crack their knuckles. And he looked at his index card and then put it in his pocket and looked at me instead. My mom worked 2 jobs when I was 7, he said. A lot of you knew her as a professional. I knew her as the person who fell asleep on the couch with her shoes still on because she didn't have time to take them off. His voice cracked just slightly. She gave me everything she had. Everything, and she never once acted like I owed her for it. I felt the tears before I was aware of deciding to cry. I pressed my fingers against the corner of my eye, quick, trying to manage it. "Mom," Marcus said, and his voice was rough now, and completely real. "I hope you know how much. I hope you know." He sat down fast, the way people do when they've said more than they meant to. Vanessa put her hand on his arm and leaned in and said something in his ear, and he nodded, and I watched that small exchange and felt the complicated ache of it. He loved me. I knew that. I had always known that. But love, I had learned, could exist in a person alongside a great deal of compromise. But the toasting began. Gerald raised a glass. The room followed. I watched Vanessa move toward the champagne table from the corner of my eye. Watched her reach for the glass she had positioned, find it missing, look down the table. I watched the smallest flicker of confusion cross her face before she controlled it. She picked up the glass I had moved to the front. She didn't know. She had no reason to suspect the switch. Why would she? Who would do something that quietly, that calmly, without confrontation? Someone who had spent 40 years in rooms where she wasn't supposed to win. Vanessa walked over to me. She held out the glass with both hands, a gesture that looked to everyone watching like deference and warmth, like a daughter-in-law honoring her mother-in-law on a big night. "For you," she said, and smiled. I looked at the glass. I looked at her face. I kept my expression exactly where I needed it. "Thank you, Vanessa," I said. "That's very thoughtful." I took the glass. She smiled wider. Something flickered behind her eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. Or relief. The specific expression of someone who has set something in motion and believes it is already done. We toasted. The room cheered. Gerald said something warm and forgettable. I brought the glass to my lips and touched the champagne to my mouth without drinking. And I watched. Across the room, Daniel Park, 28 years old, enthusiastic, had been drinking freely all evening, reached for a glass from the back of the champagne table, the one that had been repositioned near the floral arrangement. He didn't know it from any other glass. He just needed a drink. He took a long sip. For a few minutes, nothing happened. I kept watching. I kept my expression pleasant and engaged. I talked to Sandra about her vendor nightmare again, a follow-up question I'd forgotten to ask. I accepted a small plate of hors d'oeuvres from a passing server. I checked in with Patricia, who was right at my elbow, and gave her a look she read immediately and correctly. Stay alert. Then, about 8 minutes after the toast, Daniel set his glass down on a side table and put his hand on the back of a chair. The woman standing next to him, Miriam from accounting, who had worked here for 15 years, noticed first. "Daniel?" Her voice went up. "You okay?" Yeah, I'm just..." He pressed his palm flat against the chair back. His voice had gone slightly blurry at the edges. "I feel really weird all of a sudden. Like, really weird." The room didn't panic yet. It went quiet first. Miriam took his arm. "Okay, let's sit you down." And then louder. Can someone get some water? Daniel isn't feeling well. I was already moving toward the table where he'd set the glass. I reached it before anyone else. I didn't pick it up. I just stood next to it, stood close to it, and I looked at Vanessa across the room. She was staring at Daniel. Her face had gone somewhere I had never seen it go before. Not panicked, not guilty. Something worse than both of those. Calculating. Her brain was working. I could see it working. Reassessing, recalibrating, searching for the exit from a situation that had gone wrong in a way she hadn't anticipated. And then she looked at me, and something passed between us that had nothing to do with the noise filling the room. People asking if Daniel was okay, Gerald calling for someone to sit him down, a woman near the door reaching for her phone. Vanessa looked at me, and I looked at her, and we both knew. She knew that I knew. And I think in that moment she also understood, for the first time, that she had badly misjudged the woman standing across from her. I had never been the soft target she thought I was. I had been waiting. Betik. In the chaos that followed, and there was real chaos, real fear, because Daniel was disoriented and needed to sit down and someone was already calling for an ambulance just to be safe. I did something that looked to anyone watching like a practical, calm, reasonable thing. I found the venue's head of security. His name was Raymond. He was a thick-shouldered man in his 50s who had the demeanor of someone who had seen everything and was annoyed by most of it. I had met him briefly when we arrived. "Raymond," I said. I kept my voice low and level, and I made sure he could see that I was serious without being hysterical. "I need you to do something for me right now before anything gets moved or cleaned up." He looked at me. "Ma'am?" "The young man who's feeling sick. He took a drink from one of the glasses on the back table. I need that glass secured. I need it bagged or covered or whatever you do, but I need it untouched, and I need the security footage for this room for the last 90 minutes. Raymond went very still. In my experience, people who work security go still like that when they understand that something real is happening. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I watched something happen at that drinks table earlier tonight," I told him. "I'm saying I switched my glass before anything happened to me. I'm saying that young man drank from the glass that was meant for me." My voice didn't shake. I had decided it wouldn't. I need that evidence preserved before someone does something to make it disappear. Raymond looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, ma'am," and moved. "What?" I went back to the main room. Patricia was beside me in seconds. "Evelyn, talk to me." "I will," I said. "Not yet." "Evelyn, Pat, not yet." I touched her arm. "Stay with Daniel. Make sure he's okay. And if Vanessa tries to go near the back table or near Raymond, I need you to—" "Done," she said before I finished the sentence. That was Patricia. 40 years of work friendship distilled into a single word. I found Marcus. He was standing near the window, away from the crowd that had gathered around Daniel, his blazer slightly wrinkled now, his face tight with concern. He'd had 3 glasses of champagne, I could tell. His eyes were a little bright, and his body was carrying the specific kind of tension that meant he knew something was wrong but couldn't find the shape of it. "Mom," he said when I reached him, "is Daniel going to be okay?" "I think so. The ambulance is on the way, just as a precaution." He ran a hand through his hair. "What happened? Did he just drink too much, or—" "Marcus." I kept my voice quiet. "I need you to stay calm when I tell you something." He looked at me. Really looked at me, the way he used to when he was a kid and he knew something was serious. "What is it?" "I need you to trust me," I said. "Can you do that?" His jaw tightened. Something moved through his eyes that I couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding something he'd been not understanding for a long time. "Mom, can you trust me?" I said again, "the way I have always trusted you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "Yes." I looked at him for a long time, at the face I had memorized when he was 3 days old, that I had watched change and grow and close off and open again over 34 years. The face of my son, who was not a villain, who was not a bad person, who had simply loved someone who had made him smaller than he should have been. "Okay," I said. "Then stay close." Across the room, Vanessa was talking to Gerald. She had her hand on his arm. She was laughing at something he said. To anyone who didn't know her, she looked like a guest at a party that had taken an unfortunate turn, handling it gracefully, keeping the mood from collapsing entirely. I watched her. She was still running, still calculating, still trying to find the angle that got her out of this clean. She had spent 6 years underestimating me. She had 1 more hour before she found out exactly how expensive that mistake had been. The ambulance arrived at 8:34 p.m. Daniel was conscious and responsive. The paramedics assessed him and said he was stable, that his symptoms, dizziness, slight confusion, elevated heart rate, were consistent with having ingested something, but that his vitals were okay. They took him to the hospital as a precaution. Before they took him, Daniel looked up at me from where he was sitting. His eyes were still a little unfocused, but he was trying to be present. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "I'm sorry I'm messing up your party." I sat down next to him. I took his hand. "You didn't mess up anything," I told him. "You hear me? You didn't do anything wrong." He nodded, and I could tell he wasn't sure what that meant. Not yet. He was 28 and kind, and had once told me my reports had shaped his career, and he was sitting here tonight because someone had used a room full of people and a glass of champagne as a weapon, and he happened to be standing in the wrong place. I held his hand until they took him. Then I straightened up, smoothed the front of my navy dress, and turned to face the rest of the evening. Raymond was waiting for me near the door. "Footage is secured," he said, "and I've got the glass." "Good." I looked at him. "What you're about to see on that footage, I need you to understand that this is real, and it needs to be handled properly." "Understood," he said. He meant it. I could tell. Outside the window, the city was lit up and indifferent. The way cities always are, beautiful and enormous and completely unconcerned with what was happening on the 6th floor of the Meridian building. 40 years of career, 63 years of life, and it all came down to this. A room full of people, a switched glass, a young man in an ambulance, and a woman across the room who still thought she could smile her way out. I had news for her, but that was for later. Right now, I went back to my retirement party. I picked up a glass, a fresh one I poured myself, and I stood in the middle of the room, and I smiled at the people who loved me, and I waited. The night was not over, not even close. Raymond came back to me 20 minutes after the ambulance left. The party had not recovered its energy. Not fully, not the way these things sometimes do when the emergency turns out to be minor, and people decide collectively to move on. The room had a different texture now. Conversations were quieter, tighter, grouped in the corners. People were still there, but they were there the way people stay at a gathering after something has gone wrong, because they don't know quite how to leave, or because part of them wants to see what happens next. I was standing near the window with Patricia when Raymond touched my elbow. "Mrs. Mercer, can I show you something?" Pat looked at me. I looked at her. "Give me a minute," I told her. Raymond led me to a small anteroom off the main hall. A narrow space with a folding table and a monitor mounted to the wall that was connected to the venue's camera system. He had the footage pulled up already, paused on a frame that showed the drinks table from an angle slightly above and to the left. "This is the view from camera 3, he said. "It covers the whole table, clear angle." He pressed play. I watched the footage the way you watch something you already know is coming, with a kind of terrible stillness, your body braced for the confirmation of a thing you hoped you were wrong about. On the screen, the party moved in fast-forward until Raymond slowed it down. And there was Vanessa, in her pale gold dress, positioned at the table. The angle was better than I'd expected. You could see her right hand clearly. You could see the small container she'd palmed. You could see the 3 seconds, barely 3 seconds, during which she tilted something into the glass while her eyes swept the room. 3 seconds. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of working on this plan, and the execution had taken 3 seconds. "That's clear enough?" I said. "Yes, ma'am." Raymond's voice was carefully neutral. That's very clear footage." I was quiet for a moment. On the screen, frozen now, Vanessa's hand was still mid-motion. A woman I had watched sit across from me at Christmas dinner. A woman who had called me Mom exactly once, early on, and then switched to Evelyn when she realized I noticed that she only used the softer name when she wanted something. "I need a copy of that," I said. "Already made 2. One for you, one held here." I looked at him. "You've done this before." He shrugged slightly. I've worked event security for 18 years. You learn to move fast when things are real. He paused. The glass is bagged and labeled. I've got my notes on the timeline. If you need any of this to go somewhere official, it's ready. I breathed in slowly. Thank you, Raymond. Don't thank me yet, he said, not unkindly. You still got a room full of people out there and a situation that hasn't finished happening. He was right. I knew he was right. I took the copy of the footage, a small USB drive he pressed into my hand, and I put it in my clutch, next to my phone, next to the voice memo from my sister that I still hadn't listened to. I went back out. Vanessa was still there. Of course she was. Leaving early would have looked wrong. She was too smart for that. She was standing with Marcus now, her hand looped through his arm, her face arranged into the specific expression she wore when she was performing concern. Brow slightly furrowed, eyes soft, head tilted just enough to signal empathy without committing to anything real. Marcus was talking to Gerald. They were discussing Daniel, whether he'd be okay, whether the venue had any liability. Normal conversation. The kind of conversation you have when you're trying to make sense of an event that feels random. It wasn't random, but Marcus didn't know that yet. I sat down at one of the tables and I let myself feel, for just a minute, how tired I was. Not physically, or not only physically, but the kind of tired that comes from carrying something alone for too long, the kind that lives in the muscles of your jaw from years of controlled expression, in the tendons of your hands from years of holding yourself together in rooms where you weren't supposed to show anything. The kind of tired that sits just behind your eyes and stays there. I had been carrying suspicion about Vanessa for 2 years. Real suspicion. Not vague discomfort, not mother-in-law instinct, but the specific, reasoned concern of a woman who had spent 4 decades reading people and organizations and knew what a threat looked like when it smiled at her across the dinner table. But suspicion is a weight that has no outlet. You can't put it down and you can't act on it, and you can't explain it to the people who need to hear it most, because they won't believe you, or they'll believe her instead. Or they'll say, you're being difficult. Say you've always had a problem with her. Say you need to try harder to make things work. So you carry it. You carry it until the night it stops being suspicion and becomes evidence. And even then, even standing here in this room with a USB drive in my clutch and footage that was unambiguous, even then, I felt the familiar pull of maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm too hard on her, maybe I've misread this entire thing. That's what years of being told you're too suspicious does to you. It makes you doubt the most reliable instrument you have, yourself. Patricia appeared at the table and sat down across from me without waiting to be invited. Tell me, she said. So I told her. Quietly, quickly, watching the room as I talked. I told her about what I'd seen at the drinks table, about the switch, about Raymond, about the footage. Pat listened without interrupting. She had always been good at that, better than most people. And when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Evelyn, she finally said, do you know what was in the glass? No, not yet. But Daniel's going to be okay. His vitals were fine. I said it firmly, partly to reassure her and partly to reassure myself. But whatever it wasn't nothing. The symptoms were real. Pat sat back in her chair. She pressed her lips together. When she looked at me, her eyes were wet, and Patricia Osei was not a woman who cried easily. 6 years, she said. She's been in your family for 6 years. I know. Marcus, I know, Pat. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I took a breath. Marcus doesn't know yet, and when he finds out, I stopped. I couldn't finish that sentence, because the end of it was it's going to break him, and I couldn't say that out loud without it becoming more real than I was ready for. Pat reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. We sat like that for a moment. Just 2 women at a table in a room full of people, surrounded by cream roses and gold string lights, and the wreckage of a party that had tried to be something beautiful. What do you need from me? She asked. Keep watching her, I said. If she tries to leave, if she picks up her bag, if she moves toward the exit, I need to know. Done. Pat stood. She smoothed her dress. She went back into the room, and I stood up too. Because this was not finished. Not by a long way. The thing about a person like Vanessa is that they don't collapse when things go wrong. That's actually what makes them dangerous. A person who panics is predictable. They run, they confess, they make mistakes that are easy to see. Vanessa didn't panic. She adjusted. I watched her adjust in real time over the next 40 minutes, and I will tell you honestly, it was impressive in the way that a well-executed lie is always a little impressive, even when you know exactly what it is. She started with Marcus. I couldn't hear what she said to him, but I watched the body language. She leaned in close, hand on his chest, intimate, anchoring. His face shifted, softened slightly. She was telling him something that required his trust, something that required him to look at her instead of at the room. Whatever it was, it worked. His posture changed from worried and uncertain to worried but with her. She had redirected his anxiety from the situation toward herself, made herself the fixed point he was orienting around. Then she moved to Gerald. That one surprised me slightly. Not that she did it, but how fast she did it. She was at his side within minutes, and within minutes after that, Gerald was laughing at something she'd said. She had a gift for finding the exact thing a person wanted to hear and delivering it at the exact moment they were most open to it. Gerald wanted to be reassured that the evening wasn't a disaster, that the venue wasn't at fault, that everything could be smoothed over. Vanessa gave him all of that, wrapped in warmth and competence and that smile. Then she came for me. I saw her moving toward my side of the room, and I made a decision, quickly, that I would not move away. Running from Vanessa, physically, symbolically, had never been my play. I was 63 years old, and I had been in harder rooms than this one, and I was not going to give this woman the satisfaction of watching me retreat on the night that was supposed to be mine. So I stood by the window, and I let her come. Evelyn. She touched my arm when she reached me. A light touch, the kind that looks affectionate. Are you okay? This has been such a strange evening. I'm so sorry it turned out like this. I looked at her. I took my time. Daniel's going to be fine, I said. That's what matters. Of course. Of course it is. She nodded. Her eyes were steady on mine, and I saw her reading me, trying to gauge what I knew, what I felt, whether I was a threat. I just feel terrible that your night was disrupted. After everything you've worked for. After everything you've worked for. She said it gently, like concern. But underneath it was a reminder. You have things that need to be protected, things that could be taken. My night's fine, Vanessa, I said. I've had 40 years of nights that didn't go according to plan. I know how to handle disruption. Something moved in her eyes, just a flicker. She recalibrated. You're so strong, she said. I've always admired that about you. And there it was, the compliment as a weapon, or as a door. She was testing whether flattery would relax me, whether I'd open up, whether I'd give her something she could use. Thank you, I said pleasantly. She waited a beat. I gave her nothing else. I'm going to go check on Marcus, she finally said. He's taking this hard. He would, I said. He cares about people. I watched her go. My heart was beating harder than my face was showing, and I was glad, not for the first time in my life, that I had learned early how to separate those two things. Marcus found me about 10 minutes later. He looked the way he used to look when he was a teenager who'd done something wrong and was working up to telling me. Like he was carrying something and the weight of it was changing his walk. Mom, can we talk? Of course. We moved to a quiet corner near the back wall, away from the cluster of conversations. Marcus's blazer was fully wrinkled now. His tie was loose. He looked like a man who'd started the evening in one story and ended up in a completely different one. Vanessa told me something, he said. I waited. She said Daniel might have just had too much to drink, that he's been known to overdo it at company events. He looked at me. Do you think that's what happened? I held Marcus's gaze and I thought about all the ways I could answer that question. I thought about what it would cost him to hear the truth tonight, right now, in this room. I thought about what it would cost him to not hear it. Marcus, I said carefully, where did Vanessa hear that about Daniel? He blinked. What? That he overdoes it at company events. Where did that come from? He opened his mouth, closed it. I watched him search his memory for the conversation and not find what he expected to find. She said she'd heard it. From someone. Daniel Park joined our team 2 years ago, I said. He's young, he's professional, and in 2 years I have never once seen him drink to excess. Not at the holiday party, not at the department retreats, not at the team dinners. I paused. But Vanessa has never met him before tonight. The silence between us had weight. So where did she hear that? I asked. Marcus stood very still. His jaw was doing the thing it had done since he was a teenager, tightening and releasing, the way it did when he was processing something that was uncomfortable to process. She might have assumed. Marcus, he looked at me. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you do that? He nodded. His eyes had gone somewhere serious and a little frightened. Something happened at this party tonight that was not an accident, I said, and I have evidence of that. I'm not going to tell you everything right now, in this room, because you deserve to hear it properly, not standing in a corner at a party. I kept my voice even and low, and I watched his face as I spoke. But I need you to know that I'm not being dramatic, and I'm not being the difficult mother-in-law, and I am not making anything up. Mom, I need you to hear me, I said. Not her version of me. Me. The words landed. I could see them land. Marcus had heard so many versions of me over the last 6 years. Vanessa's version, which was a woman who was too controlling, too attached to her son, too resistant to change. That version had been built carefully, introduced gradually, reinforced with small comments and eye rolls and the slow architecture of a narrative. It was the version he'd been living with long enough that it had started to feel like the original. But Marcus had known me for 34 years, and somewhere underneath the narrative, the original was still there. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "Okay, Mom, I'm listening." I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been wound tight for a long time. Not relief exactly. More like the beginning of the possibility of relief. Something that said, this part, at least, is going the right way. Good, I said. Stay close to me tonight. He nodded, and he stayed. At 9:15, Miriam from accounting came to find me. Miriam was a small, precise woman who had worked in our department for 15 years and was constitutionally incapable of small talk or exaggeration. If Miriam told you something, it was because she had verified it and decided it was worth saying. She had the energy of a person who had strong opinions about filing systems and was usually correct. "Evelyn," she said, "I need to show you something." She handed me her phone. On the screen was a photograph. She'd taken it on her camera, a close-up. It was the drinks table, and it was taken from an angle I hadn't seen, slightly behind the table, and it was taken during the toast. It showed Vanessa's hand, and in the frame of the photograph, between Vanessa's fingers, you could see the edge of something small, a small twist of packaging, pale, barely visible against the pale tablecloth. "I wasn't sure if I was seeing things," Miriam said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. I was standing behind the table getting a glass during the toast, and I saw her hand and something looked wrong, so I took a picture. I wasn't sure what I was seeing, but after Daniel got sick, I looked at it again. I looked at the photograph for a long time. "Miriam," I said, "you need to save that and not delete it. I already emailed it to myself." She took her phone back. "What's happening, Evelyn?" "I'm going to make sure it's handled," I said. "That's all I can tell you right now, but what you did was exactly right. You trusted what you saw." She looked at me with the expression of a person who has just confirmed a fear they'd hoped was irrational. "Is Daniel going to be okay?" she asked. "He's going to be okay," I said. And I meant it. Miriam nodded once. She went back to her corner of the room, and I stood there with the accumulation of the evening pressing against me from all sides. The USB drive in my clutch, Miriam's photograph, Raymond's sealed glass, Marcus standing 20 feet away watching his wife across the room with a new and terrible uncertainty on his face. 6 years. She had been inside my family for 6 years, and in 6 years she had tried to turn my son against me, undermine my relationship with him slowly enough that he hadn't noticed it happening, pushed for access to my finances in ways that never quite broke the surface of acceptable behavior, and had apparently decided that tonight, the night that was supposed to be mine, the night that was supposed to be a celebration of everything I had built, was her best window. The audacity of it would have knocked me flat if I hadn't spent 40 years learning not to let things knock me flat. But underneath the steadiness, underneath the controlled face, and the quiet strategy, I was furious. Not the hot reactive fury that makes you do stupid things, the cold kind, the kind that sits in your sternum like a stone and makes everything very clear, the kind that says, you are not going to get away with this. Not tonight, not ever. I looked at Vanessa across the room. She was laughing at something Marcus had said. Her hand was on his arm. Her head was thrown back slightly. The full laugh, the one that she deployed when she wanted people to see her being joyful. She thought she was still winning. She was about to understand how wrong she was. Raymond appeared at my shoulder. The police have been called, he said quietly. Not by me. One of the paramedics apparently filed a report when they took Daniel. Standard procedure when symptoms suggest possible ingestion of a substance. They'll be here within the hour. The hour? I looked around the room. An hour was enough time for Vanessa to sense the shift and disappear. Enough time for evidence to be mishandled. Enough time for Marcus, who still didn't fully understand what he was standing next to be talked out of what he'd almost let himself see. Does she know? I asked. I don't think so, Raymond said. Not yet. Okay. I took a breath. Then we have an hour. I looked at Marcus. I looked at Vanessa. I thought about 40 years of work, 63 years of life, 2 years of being told I was too suspicious, and the moment I watched her hand move over that glass. An hour. It was more than enough. The hour I thought I had turned into 40 minutes. I know that because at 9:23 p.m., I watched Vanessa excuse herself from a conversation near the center of the room, pick up her clutch from where she'd left it on a chair, and begin a slow, casual drift toward the coat check near the entrance. Not walking fast, not looking anxious, just moving in the easy, unhurried way of a woman who had decided the evening was winding down and it was time to collect her things. She was leaving. I moved before I made the conscious decision to move. Marcus. I touched his arm as I passed him. She's heading for the door. He turned. I didn't wait to see his expression. I walked across the room at the same measured pace Vanessa was using. Not running, not chasing, nothing that would create a scene before I was ready for one. And I reached the coat check area 30 seconds after she did. She was talking to the attendant, giving her number, smiling that smile. Vanessa, I said. She turned. And something happened in her face, a very fast thing, there and gone, like a shutter closing. Then the smile came back up. Evelyn, I was just going to pop out and check on Marcus's car. He thinks he left the window cracked and it looks like rain. It was a lie. A smooth, immediate, fully formed lie. I had to acknowledge, somewhere in the part of me that was still operating analytically, that she was very good at this. The car can wait, I said. Come sit with me for a minute. I really should. Vanessa. I said her name the way I had said it exactly once before in 6 years, without warmth, without the social padding that women are trained to wrap around every direct statement so the other person doesn't feel confronted. Just her name, flat and clear. Come sit with me. The coat check attendant had gone very still in the way of someone who can feel tension and is hoping to become invisible. Vanessa looked at me for a long moment, and I saw, behind her eyes, the calculation happening, the rapid triage of options, the assessment of what I knew versus what I could prove, the question of whether walking away right now would make things worse or better. She decided to stay, which meant she still believed she could manage this. Of course, she said pleasantly. Lead the way, Ian. I took her to the anteroom where Raymond had shown me the footage. I didn't tell her where we were going. I just walked and she followed. And I felt the specific discomfort of having her behind me. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The awareness of a woman who has just understood that the person walking behind her is more dangerous than she had known. Raymond was still in the anteroom. I had texted him from across the room. He stood near the folding table with his arms at his sides and his face neutral. When Vanessa saw him, something shifted in her posture, barely perceptible, but I'd been watching her posture for 6 years. What is this? She said. Still pleasant, still managed. Sit down, I said. Evelyn, I don't really understand why. I'm not asking Vanessa. She sat. I pulled the other chair out and sat across from her. Raymond stayed standing by the door. The monitor on the wall was dark. I had asked Raymond to leave it dark for now, Not because I was building to a reveal, not because I wanted drama, but because I needed to look at her face first. I needed to see what she did when she didn't know exactly what I had. Daniel Park is at the hospital right now, I said. I know, it's terrible. I hope he's going to be okay. I cut across her. No thanks to what happened to him tonight. The smile held. I'm not sure what you mean. Yes, you are. A pause. The smile didn't waver, but something behind it recalibrated. Evelyn, I think you're upset, which is completely understandable given everything. I'm not upset, I said. I want you to hear that clearly. I am not emotional right now. I am telling you what I know. I looked at her steadily. I watched you put something in a glass at the drinks table at 7:42 this evening. I switched that glass before the toast. Daniel drank from it by accident, and the entire thing is on the venue's security footage. The room went quiet. Not the quiet of nothing happening, the quiet of everything stopping. For the first time in 6 years, Vanessa Hale Mercer had nothing to say. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then she found her footing again. That's a very serious accusation, she said. Her voice had changed, cooler now, the warmth stripped back. This was the version of her she kept underneath the performance. And I think you need to be very careful about what you're alleging, because if you're suggesting that I'm not suggesting anything, I said. I'm telling you what I saw, and what the camera saw, and what the glass that Raymond has in an evidence bag saw. I watched her face. I'm telling you that the police were already called by the paramedics as standard procedure. I'm telling you that they'll be here within the next 30 minutes. I leaned forward slightly. And I'm telling you that this is the last quiet moment you're going to have tonight. So if there is anything you want to say, to me, not to anyone else, just to me, this is the time. But despite she stared at me, and I saw it. The thing behind her eyes that she had been managing all evening. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. Guilt implies something was felt before the action. What I saw was more like a wire that had been pulled too tight for too long, finally starting to show the strain. You switched the glass, she said, very quietly. I did. How did you? She stopped herself. She looked away, and for a second she looked like a different person entirely. Younger, almost, stripped of the gloss. How long have you known? Known what you're capable of. 2 years. Known tonight specifically? About 45 minutes before you put anything in that glass. She looked back at me. That's not possible. You've been underestimating me since the day Marcus brought you home, I said. I've been watching you the same amount of time. Something moved across her face then. It wasn't remorse. I want to be honest about that, because in stories like this, people always want there to be remorse, want the moment when the villain cracks open and you see the hurt underneath. That's not what I saw. What I saw was something closer to exhaustion. The exhaustion of a person who has been running a very complicated operation for a long time and has just learned it failed. What do you want? She asked, and there was the question. Stripped of everything else, that was what it came down to. What did I want? Because in Vanessa's world, everything was a negotiation. Everything had a number, a trade, a resolution that could be reached if the right terms were offered. I looked at her for a long moment. I want my son back, I said. I want the $60,000 you tried to take from me 14 months ago to be the last time you ever reach into my family for money that isn't yours. I want Daniel Park to recover fully and never know how close tonight came to something much worse. I paused. And I want you to understand clearly that what happens next is not in my hands. It stopped being in my hands the moment you made a choice at that drinks table. She was quiet. The police are coming, I said. Whatever you decide to do with the time you have left before they get here, that's your business. But I'm done managing you. I'm done working around you. I'm done pretending that the woman my son married is something she isn't. I stood up. Evelyn, we're done here, Vanessa. I walked out of the anteroom and I closed the door behind me, and my hands were shaking. Finally, now, with no one watching. And I pressed them flat against the wall of the corridor, and I breathed, just breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way I had learned to do in the hardest meetings, in the worst moments, in every room where I wasn't supposed to crack. Raymond would stay with her. I had asked him to make sure she didn't leave. He understood. I straightened up. I went to find Marcus. He was standing by the window where I'd left him, but he wasn't looking at the room anymore. He was looking at his phone, and when I got close enough, I could see that his face had changed completely. "Marcus," I said. He looked up. His eyes were red at the rims, not crying. Marcus didn't cry easily, hadn't since he was about 12, some armor he'd built young that I had never entirely stopped worrying about. But close. "I got a text from his brother," he said. He held up his phone. On the screen was a message from a contact labeled Brian P., Daniel Park's older brother, who also worked at a firm in the building. They'd apparently met at an industry event. The message was short. "Your friend from the party is at St. Catherine's. They're running a talk screen. He didn't just have too much to drink, Marcus. Something's wrong. Do you know what happened?" Marcus looked at me. "What happened tonight?" he asked. His voice was very careful. The voice of a man who is asking a question he already half knows the answer to and is trying to prepare himself. I sat down at the table nearest the window. I patted the chair beside me. He sat, and I told him. All of it, this time. Not carefully managed, not strategic, not the version designed to protect him from too much at once. Just the truth. Starting with what I had seen at the drinks table, going back through the last 2 years of small observations and unanswered questions, and the loan he'd called me about from his car, and ending with Vanessa sitting in the anteroom with Raymond. I talked for a long time. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the silence stretched out long enough that I started to worry I had broken something that couldn't be put back together. I had seen it happen. Families where the truth arrived too fast and too hard, and the people inside them couldn't find a way to orient themselves. And so they pushed the truth back out and chose the story that was easier to live inside. I didn't know, sitting there, which way Marcus was going to fall. "The loan," he finally said. His voice came out strange, flat and thin. "I called you about the loan because she told me to. She said you'd want to help, that you'd be glad to." He stopped. "She said if you said no, it was because you'd never really accepted her." I closed my eyes for a second. "I know," I said. "I believed her." His voice broke slightly on the last word. Mom, I actually thought you just didn't like her. I thought that was the whole thing, that you couldn't let go of me, and it was just about me." He pressed his hand flat on the table. "I let her tell me that story for 6 years. Marcus? She was in our house," he said. "She's been in our house. She knows everything she has access to all our accounts. He stopped. He breathed. I could see him trying to hold himself together the way I had taught him, the way every person who has had to be strong for too long eventually teaches themselves. "What did she put in the glass?" "I don't know yet. The talk screen will tell us." He nodded. His jaw was doing that thing. "I'm going to ask you something," I said carefully, "and I need you to answer it honestly, even if the answer is hard." He looked at me. "The investment that went wrong, the one that cost you the $60,000 you needed. What do you know about it?" A long pause. "She handled it," he said. "She said she had a contact, a financial guy she'd worked with before. She said it was a sure thing." He exhaled slowly. "I should have asked more questions. I knew I should have. But when I asked questions, she'd get upset. She'd say I didn't trust her, that I was always second-guessing her, like everyone else in her life had done." He rubbed the back of his neck. "So I stopped asking. That was the architecture of it, right there. I had seen it from the outside for years, but hearing him describe it from the inside, the slow erosion of his own instincts, the replacement of his judgment with her reactions, made something in my chest ache with a particular sharpness." "She made you feel like asking questions was an act of betrayal," I said. "Yeah." A bitter, broken half laugh. "Yeah, she did." I put my hand over his. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "Whatever happened to that money?" I said. "And whatever else she's been involved in, that's going to come out now. All of it. And it's going to be hard, and it's going to be public, and it's going to be the worst kind of hard." I squeezed his hand. "But you're going to be okay. You hear me? You are going to be okay." He turned his hand over and gripped mine back. Hard. The grip of a child, of a grown man, of someone who is trying to hold on to the one anchor he still believes in. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, very quietly. "Don't," I said. "You don't owe me an apology." You owe yourself an honest look at the last 6 years, and that's between you and you. But you don't owe me sorry. He nodded. He wiped his eye with the back of his hand, quick, in that practiced invisible way of his. We sat there together in the noise and the wreckage of the party that had tried to be something beautiful, and I thought about how strange it was, how the worst nights of your life have a way of also being the ones where you find out exactly who is real and who isn't, exactly what has been holding and what was never what it looked like. I had lost something tonight. I didn't know yet the full shape of what. But I had found my son, and that was not nothing. That was actually everything. At 9:51 p.m., 2 police officers came through the main doors of the conference room. I had been expecting them, but the room hadn't. The effect was immediate. Conversation stopped, heads turned, and the already subdued energy of the evening compressed into something tighter and more anxious. Patricia caught my eye from across the room. I gave her a small nod. I went to meet the officers before anyone else could. A woman and a man, both in uniform, both with the efficient, non-theatrical energy of people who had responded to a lot of calls and were trying to assess this one quickly. The woman introduced herself as Officer Delaney. She had close-cut hair and eyes that moved around the room in a way that told me she was taking everything in. "Mrs. Mercer?" she said. "Yes. We got a report from the paramedics about a possible deliberate substance ingestion. Can you walk us through what you observed?" "I can," I said. "And I have security footage, a physical evidence sample, and a photographic witness." Officer Delaney looked at me with the slightly recalibrated expression of someone who had expected this to be more complicated. "Okay," she said. "Let's start there." I walked them to Raymond. I let Raymond walk them through the footage and the sealed glass. I handed Officer Delaney the USB drive with the copy. Miriam appeared without being asked at exactly the right moment and handed over her phone with the photograph and her statement about when and how she'd taken it. Miriam gave her statement in the same precise, unembellished way she handled everything, bullet point clarity, without drama. I watched the 2 officers process what they were being shown, and I watched the understanding move across their faces. "The individual you believe is responsible," Officer Delaney said. "Is she still here?" "She's in the anteroom," I said. "Security kept her from leaving. She's been there for about 20 minutes. The officers exchanged a look. Delaney's partner, a younger man who hadn't spoken yet, said, "You anticipated that she might try to leave?" "Yes," I said. "How long did you have before we arrived?" "About 40 minutes. He looked at me with the expression of someone reassessing a situation. "And in 40 minutes, you secured the footage, the evidence sample, a photographic witness, and kept the subject on location?" I looked at him calmly. "I've been in operations management for 40 years, I said. "I know how to run a room." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. They went to the anteroom. I did not go with them. That part was not mine to be in. I went back to Marcus. He was still at the window, standing now, watching the officers cross the room. His face was very still, the stillness of a person trying to hold themselves together while the entire structure of 6 years shifts under their feet. "They're going to talk to her," I said. He nodded. "Marcus, whatever she says in there, whatever version of events she offers, they have the footage." "I know." His voice was quiet. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight." "Always." He turned to look at me. "Did you know it was going to be this bad before tonight? Did you know how far she'd actually... Did you know it would come to this?" I thought about that honestly. "I knew something was wrong," I said. "I knew she was capable of damage. I didn't know the shape of it until tonight." I paused. "I think some part of me didn't want to know, because knowing meant losing something I couldn't get back." He held my gaze. "Me. You," I said. "Knowing the full truth meant it was going to break something between you and her, and I was never, Marcus, I was never glad about that. I want you to know that. Whatever happens now, I never wanted this to be the ending." He looked away. Outside the window, the city was indifferent as always, the lights blurring slightly through glass that needed cleaning. Somewhere in this building, in a narrow anteroom, Vanessa was talking to 2 police officers, and the version of this family that had existed for 6 years was being dismantled in real time. "I don't know who I've been," Marcus said, very quietly, almost to himself. "You've been someone who loved someone," I said. "That's not a character flaw. It's how she got in." He was quiet for a long time. Then Patricia appeared at my elbow. Patricia, who had been at my side all evening, who had watched and waited and not pushed and trusted me to handle this in the way I needed to handle it. She put her hand on my shoulder, just briefly, the gesture of a woman who had been through 40 years of her own hard rooms and knew when words were the wrong thing. I covered her hand with mine for a second. The anteroom door opened. Officer Delaney came out first. She walked toward me with purpose. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, "we're going to need formal statements from you, the security officer, and the witness. We're also going to need to take the evidence into official custody." "Of course," I said. She looked at me steadily. "Mrs. Mercer, I want you to know that what you did tonight, securing that evidence, keeping the scene contained, making sure none of it was compromised before we arrived, that makes a significant difference." I looked at her. "I know," I said. "That's why I did it." Behind her, through the anteroom door that had swung slightly open, I could see Vanessa being helped to her feet by the male officer, her pale gold dress, her hair still perfect because of course it was, her face turned away from the room, which was the only mercy she was getting from this evening, that most of the remaining guests couldn't see her face. Marcus made a sound beside me. Low, quiet, the sound of something breaking and then immediately being held together. He pressed his fingers against his mouth. I put my hand on his back, and I kept it there. The room watched. Vanessa was walked toward the exit. She didn't look at Marcus. I didn't know whether that was pride or strategy or something she couldn't bring herself to do. I didn't know, and somewhere in me, underneath the cold fury and the exhaustion and the complicated grief of it, I noticed that I felt something that surprised me. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just stillness. The particular stillness that comes after the thing you've been bracing for finally arrives, and you're still standing. I was still standing. After 40 years of work and 63 years of life, and 6 years of carrying the weight of knowing something was wrong and not being able to prove it, I was still standing in my navy dress, with my chin up, in the room that had been built to celebrate me. The room was mine. My name was still on the banner, and Evelyn Mercer was still standing. The party ended the way a fire ends. Not all at once, but in stages. The heat going out of it section by section until what remained was just the shape of where something had been burning. Most guests left within 20 minutes of Vanessa being walked out. They said their goodbyes carefully, with the particular tact of people who have witnessed something they're not sure how to categorize yet, something that hadn't finished becoming a story, that was still too raw and too close to be processed as an event rather than an emergency. Gerald Whitmore gripped my hand with both of his and said something about calling me Monday, and I thanked him. And we both knew the call would probably not happen, because Gerald was a man who didn't know how to navigate situations that didn't have a corporate resolution. Sandra from Atlanta held me for a long moment before she left. She didn't say anything. She just held on, and I let her, and that was enough. Miriam was the last non-essential person to go. She stood at the coat check with her bag on her arm and looked at me across the room with that precise, steady face of hers. "You handled this correctly," she said when I reached her. Coming from Miriam, that was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "Thank you for the photograph," I said. "You trusted what you saw." "I usually do," she said. "People should do that more." She put her coat on and buttoned it neatly. "Take care of yourself, Evelyn. The hard part isn't always the event. It's the morning after." She left. The doors swung closed behind her. I stood in the room that had held my retirement party. The cream roses starting to wilt slightly at the edges now. The champagne flat in the glasses nobody had finished. The banner still up because no one had taken it down. "Congratulations, Evelyn. 40 years of excellence." Under the string lights it looked different than it had at the start of the evening. Less triumphant, more like a document of something. Patricia was still there. Raymond was still there. Marcus was still there, sitting in a chair near the window with his elbows on his knees and his head bowed, not asleep, just somewhere inside himself where I couldn't reach him yet. I let him be. Officer Delaney came back into the room at 10:34 p.m. She had been outside on her radio for the better part of 20 minutes. Her face when she returned had the specific quality of someone who had just received information that confirmed a worst-case scenario. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, "can I speak with you privately?" We stepped into the corridor. "The preliminary tox report on Mr. Park came back from the hospital," she said. She kept her voice professional, but her eyes were serious in a way that put a specific kind of cold in my chest. "He ingested a sedative compound. Not a lethal dose. His vitals are stable, and the doctors are confident he'll make a full recovery. But the concentration was high enough that if an adult woman of average weight had consumed the full glass," she paused, "the effects would have been significantly more severe. Disorientation, loss of motor control, possible loss of consciousness." The corridor was very quiet. "She wasn't trying to kill me," I said. It came out steadier than I felt. "No," Delaney said carefully. "The working theory right now is incapacitation. Whether the goal was to create a medical event that would allow someone to make decisions on your behalf or to access something in the hours that followed, we don't know yet. That's a direction the investigation will go." I stood with that for a moment. Incapacitation. Decisions made on my behalf. In the hours that followed, I thought about my purse, which I'd left on a chair at the party, my phone inside it, my financial planner's card, the small notebook I carried with account information. I'd been too old-fashioned to move fully into an app. I thought about the state I would have been in. Confused, disoriented, unable to resist or question or object. I thought about Vanessa's steady hands and her access to Marcus, to my home, to the documents I kept in the fireproof box in my bedroom closet that Marcus knew about because I had told him years ago in case of emergency. She had been building toward this for a long time. Tonight was the execution. "What happens now?" I asked. "She's been brought in for questioning. Given the evidence, we'll be looking at charges. The severity depends on what the investigation turns up about intent and premeditation." Delaney looked at me directly. "I want to be honest with you. These cases, when it's family, when it's a daughter-in-law, they get complicated. People recant. People protect people they shouldn't. Evidence that looks airtight can get challenged in ways that take months." She paused. "But the footage is very clear, and the tox report gives us the substance. And you have a witness." She almost said something else and stopped herself. "Say it," I said. "You also have a 63-year-old woman who noticed something was wrong, switched a glass without panicking, secured 4 separate pieces of evidence in under 40 minutes, and kept the subject on location until we arrived." She held my gaze. "That is not nothing, Mrs. Mercer. That is a very strong foundation for a case." I thanked her. She went back to her work. I leaned against the corridor wall for a moment, alone, and I let the full weight of what she had said land on me. Severe effects. Loss of consciousness. Decisions made on my behalf. Vanessa had not done this in a moment of anger or desperation. She had planned it, had likely planned it for months, chosen the event, chosen the timing, prepared the substance, engineered her position near the drinks table, had probably thought through what came after: the frantic husband, the incapacitated mother-in-law, the window of hours in which the right documents could be accessed, the right calls made, the right signatures obtained while I was in no condition to know what I was agreeing to. $60,000 had been a test, I realized, to see if the soft approach worked. It hadn't, so she had moved to something harder. What I had taken for boldness was actually desperation. And desperation, I had learned a long time ago, makes people sloppy in ways that confidence never does. She had been sloppy, and I had been watching. I pushed off the wall. I went back in to find my son. That's it. Marcus had not moved from the chair. When I sat down next to him, he looked up, and I could see that he had been crying, actually crying, not the held together almost of earlier, but the real thing. His eyes red and swollen, and his face carrying the particular rawness of a man who doesn't cry often and is therefore undone by it when he does. I did not say anything. I put my hand on his back, the same way I had when he was small and sick or scared or had fallen off his bike and was more humiliated than hurt. Just my hand on his back, steady and there. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for a long time. "She had a key to your house," he said. "Vanessa. You gave us a spare key years ago, in case of emergency, and I just remembered that she took it out of the kitchen drawer a few months back and said she was getting a copy made in case she ever needed it. I absorbed that quietly. Has she been to your house recently, without you knowing? I thought. There had been a Tuesday 3 weeks ago when I'd come home and something had felt slightly off. Not obviously disturbed, nothing missing that I could identify, but the particular discomfort of a space that has been occupied in your absence. I had told myself I was imagining it. Possibly, I said. Mom. His voice cracked on the word. Mom, I don't have words for how... Marcus, stop. No, I need you to hear me. I hear you, I said firmly. I hear you, and I love you, but I need you to understand something right now, and I need you to really take it in. I waited until he was looking at me. What happened to you was not stupidity. It was not weakness. People like Vanessa, people who are that calculated, that patient, that good at finding exactly what you need to hear and delivering it, they do not target weak people. They target people with things worth taking. You are a good man who trusted his wife. That is not a character flaw. He looked at me with the wet, exhausted eyes of someone who wanted very much to believe what I was saying and wasn't there yet. I let her tell me you were the problem, he said. I know. I let her tell me that for 6 years. I know. I kept my hand on his back. And I need you to let that be something you look at honestly, not something you punish yourself with. There's a difference. One makes you stronger. The other just adds to what she already took from you. He pressed his hands over his face for a moment. Then he dropped them. He straightened up in the chair. I watched him do it. Watched him find the spine of himself again, imperfect and still shaky, but there. The same spine I had watched him build and lose and rebuild since he was a small child who fell down a lot and got back up every time. I need to know everything that's going to come out, he said. About the money, about the investment, about whatever else she's been doing. You will, I said. Not tonight. Tonight you just need to get through tonight. He nodded. Then he said, almost to himself, 6 years and I don't even know what was real. I thought about that question. What was real? It was the question people always landed on after a long betrayal, trying to go back through the timeline and sort the genuine from the performed, trying to figure out where the person began and the manipulation ended. I had done that kind of archaeology after my own difficult marriage, years ago, and I knew what it cost. Some of it might have been real, I said. That's actually the hardest part. People like her, they don't operate entirely without feeling. They just don't let feeling stop them. I paused. But what was real and what wasn't? That's a question for later, when you're not sitting in the room where it happened. He nodded again. He looked at the window. The city outside was starting to look like late night. Fewer lights moving, the energy of it gone quieter and colder. Where will she... He started the question and couldn't finish it. She's been brought in for questioning, I said. Beyond that, I don't know yet. He absorbed that in silence. Patricia appeared with 2 cups of coffee she had apparently found or commandeered from somewhere, because that was Patricia. In the middle of everything, she would locate the coffee. She set them on the table without comment and sat across from us. Marcus looked at his cup. Then he looked at Pat. You've known my mom for a long time, he said. 22 years, Pat said. Did you know? About Vanessa? Pat considered that honestly. I knew your mom was worried. I knew she was watching something and not saying everything she saw because she was protecting you. She held his gaze. I didn't know it would come to this. But I've spent 22 years watching Evelyn Mercer read people correctly and say nothing until the right moment. She paused. She's never been wrong yet. Marcus looked at me. I picked up my coffee. It was slightly too hot and not quite strong enough, and it was the best thing I'd tasted all night. It was Raymond who found it. At 11:05 p.m., while the officers were finishing their documentation in the anteroom, Raymond came to me with his phone and a look on his face that had shifted from professional neutral to something more like carefully controlled anger. Mrs. Mercer, I ran Vanessa Hale Mercer's name through our system. Standard procedure when we're holding someone for law enforcement. We cross-reference with incident reports from other venues in the building network. He held out his phone. She was flagged at a corporate event 3 months ago at the Hartwell Suites on the 14th floor. She was asked to leave after staff noticed her in a restricted back area near the event coordinator's office. He paused. The event was a private estate planning seminar. She wasn't registered. Nobody knew how she got in. I stared at his phone. An estate planning seminar, restricted area. Were there names? I said. Attendee names from that event? The venue doesn't keep full attendee logs that long, but the event was hosted by a firm called Caldwell Estate Partners. I knew that name. I had a consultation scheduled with Caldwell Estate Partners for the second week of next month. My first appointment after retirement, to update my will and review my financial structures. I had mentioned it to Marcus 4 months ago, at dinner with Vanessa present. The cold that moved through me was different from anything I'd felt all evening. This was the cold of understanding the full scope of something, all at once, with no way to unfeel it. She hadn't been improvising. She hadn't decided at the last minute to do something reckless at my retirement party. She had been building a map, attending events where she could learn the terrain, access names, understand the structures. The retirement party had been a calculated window. Not a crime of opportunity, but the final step in a sequence that had probably started the moment I told Marcus I was retiring. Retirement meant changes, new documents, new distributions, a window in which the financial architecture of my life would be actively shifting, a window in which, if I were incapacitated at the right moment, the right person in the right position might be able to influence outcomes before anyone knew to question it. I gave Raymond's phone back to him. That needs to go to Officer Delaney, I said. Already texted her, he said, but I wanted you to know first. I looked at him. He was 18 years into an event security job in a building most people never thought twice about, and he had just cracked open a thread that I suspected was longer and more complicated than any of us fully understood yet. Raymond, I said, I owe you more than I know how to say right now. He shrugged once, the same way he had earlier with that practiced understatement. I just work here, Mrs. Mercer. Then, but I'm glad you switched that glass. So am I said. I told Marcus about the estate planning seminar. I had considered not telling him, considered waiting until the formal investigation turned up its own findings, sparing him the incremental revelations. But sitting with that information alone felt like returning to the dynamic I'd spent 6 years trapped in, knowing something, saying nothing, managing it quietly so as not to cause pain. That was over. I had made a decision, somewhere between the anteroom and the corridor, and right now, that the era of managing Marcus's feelings by withholding things from him was done. He was 34 years old. He deserved the truth in real time. He listened without moving. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, She sat across from me at the dinner when you mentioned Caldwell Partners. I remember she poured herself more wine and didn't say anything, and I thought she was just bored. His voice was flat in a way that had moved past grief into something more like the early stages of understanding how extensively he'd been studied. She was filing it away. Yes, she was always doing that. He said it slowly, like something clarifying in real time. I thought she was just interested in details. She remembered everything. I thought it was a good quality. I thought... He stopped, restarted. She knew the name of my first grade teacher. I told her once and she remembered it 3 years later, and I thought that meant she loved me. The room was very quiet. Marcus, I said carefully, that may have been real. I can't tell you what was real and what wasn't. What I can tell you is that real feeling and real harm can come from the same person at the same time. That's what makes it hard to see. That's what makes it easy to stay. He looked at me with the fractured expression of someone trying to hold two incompatible truths in the same hand. I need to call a lawyer, he said. Yes, I said, in the morning. And I need to... The joint accounts. She has access. Call the bank first thing. I'll go with you. He nodded. He was moving into practical mode. I recognized it, the way he always had, reaching for the concrete when the emotional was too large to hold all at once. It was not avoidance, it was survival. Mom. He looked at me one more time. After tonight, what happens with us? You and me, are we... He couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood what he was asking. Whether the damage Vanessa had done between us, the 6 years of distance and managed narratives and calls from cars, whether any of that was recoverable. Whether I was still his mother in the way that mattered. Whether he still had a home in me. I looked at my son. At the face I had known since before he had words. At the person who had grown up imperfect and complicated. And mine. "There is no version of this," I said quietly, "where you are not my son. There is no amount of time or damage that changes that, you hear me?" He nodded. His jaw was doing the thing. I said, because I was done with half-truths. "We have things to talk about the years that are between us, about the ways I could have done better too, because I am not blameless in every part of this. When you're ready, when we're both past the emergency of this, we're going to sit down and we're going to actually talk. Not manage, not protect, talk." He held my gaze. "Okay," he said. "Okay," I said. Patricia, across the table, was looking at her coffee cup with the expression of a woman who was deeply present and wise enough to let the moment breathe. Officer Delaney came back in at 11:22. She told us that Vanessa was being formally charged that evening. She told us that the investigation into the financial elements would require cooperation from us in the coming days. She told us that Daniel Park's doctors had confirmed he would be discharged in the morning with no lasting effects. I thanked her. She shook my hand. She left. The room settled into a new kind of quiet, not the anticipatory quiet of the early evening, not the shocked quiet of aftermath, but something further along. The quiet of a thing that was done, for now, and would have its consequences, and those consequences would take time and be difficult, and there was nothing left to manage tonight. I looked at the banner one more time. Congratulations, Evelyn. 40 years of excellence. I thought about what Raymond had said. The hard part isn't always the event. It's the morning after. That had been Miriam, actually. But the sentiment stood. The morning after was coming. The lawyers, the bank, the investigation, the long, careful work of understanding the full shape of what Vanessa had been building and dismantling it piece by piece. Marcus's marriage, whatever it had been, was finished. The financial damage, the investment, the 60,000, whatever else, would need to be assessed. There would be depositions. There would be days when Marcus would call me from his own phone, not his car, because there would be no one telling him not to, and we would talk in the halting, effortful way of people relearning a language they'd been prevented from speaking. There would be hard mornings. I already knew that. I have never been a woman who pretended otherwise. But tonight, right now, in this room, in this chair, I was still here. 63 years old, 40 years of work behind me, my son sitting next to me and my best friend across from me, and every piece of what Vanessa had tried to take still intact and in my hands. She had looked at my life and seen assets to be acquired. She had looked at me and seen a woman in the last chapter of her useful years, someone whose time was running out, whose guard might slip, whose love for her son might be the lever that finally moved her. She had been wrong about every single part of that. My life was not a final chapter. My guard did not slip. And my love for Marcus, that complicated, imperfect, tested, and surviving love, had never been a lever. It had been a reason to pay attention. It had been a reason to stay sharp. It had been, tonight, the reason I noticed something wrong and did something right and stood in this room at the end of the evening with everything that mattered still standing. I was 63 years old, and I was not done. Not even close. The morning after arrived the way Miriam had warned me it would. Not gently, not gradually, but all at once. The full weight of the previous night landing on me the moment I opened my eyes. I had slept 4 hours. Maybe 4.5. I lay in my bed in the house that was entirely mine. My furniture, my photographs on the walls, my slightly overgrown backyard visible through the gap in the curtains. And I stared at the ceiling and I let myself feel, for the first time without an audience, everything I had been managing too carefully to feel the night before. I felt the anger first. That was the one I'd been holding at arm's length all evening, keeping it cold and controlled and useful. Now, alone, it came up hot, and I let it. I had earned it. 40 years of building something, 63 years of surviving things, and someone had stood at a drinks table at my own retirement party with a small container in her hand and decided my life was an asset to be liquidated. The anger burned for about 10 minutes. Then it became something else, something more complicated and harder to name. Not sadness exactly. More like the specific grief of understanding that the danger had been living inside your family the whole time, at your dinner table, in the chair across from you at Christmas, calling itself love. That kind of betrayal doesn't just make you angry. It makes you question your own perception. It makes you go back through the years and look at every moment with new eyes and feel, all over again, every time you dismissed your own instincts because you wanted to be wrong. Because being right about something like this is not a victory. It is a loss wearing the clothes of a victory, and the difference matters. I got up at 6:14 a.m. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table, and I listened to my sister Renee's voice memo from the night before, the one I'd never gotten to at the party. Renee had recorded it sitting in her car in a parking lot in Phoenix by the sound of it, and she was talking the way she always talked, fast and warm and without filter. Her voice full of the particular affection of a sister who has known you your whole life and loves you anyway. "Ev," she said, "I'm so sorry I can't be there. I have been sitting here in this parking lot for 20 minutes because I started thinking about you at 9 years old in that apartment on Decker Street, and you used to organize your school supplies before the first day of school, like it was a military operation, and I miss you so much. I'm so proud of you. 40 years. Do you know how many people give up? Do you know how rare you are?" She laughed a little, self-conscious. "I'm not trying to make you cry. Call me when it's over. I want to hear everything. I love you, Ev. Go be celebrated. You earned every single bit of it." I sat at my kitchen table and I cried. Not the controlled, managed, almost crying of the night before, but the real kind, the ugly kind, the kind that comes from 40 years of not crying enough and one night of holding too much, and a sister's voice saying, "Do you know how rare you are at exactly the moment you needed to hear it?" I cried for about 8 minutes. Then I washed my face, refilled my coffee, and called my attorney. His name was Howard Briggs, and he had handled my legal affairs for 11 years, and when I called him at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning, he answered on the third ring without any indication that this was unusual. Howard was 70 years old and had been practicing family and estate law for 4 decades, which meant he had seen everything twice and was not easily rattled. I gave him the summary. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief silence. "Evelyn," he said, "I have 3 questions." "Go ahead." "First, is your son cooperating with you fully?" "Yes." "Second, do you have your own copies of the evidence, the footage, the photograph, Raymond's statement?" "I have the USB drive. I'll follow up with Raymond and Miriam this morning." "Third," a pause, "the financial access, joint accounts, property, any documents she might have had exposure to. Is your son moving on those this morning?" "We're going to the bank when it opens." "Good." Howard's voice was steady and sure in the way of a man who knew exactly what to do with a situation like this. "Here's what I need you to understand before you walk into that bank. The formal charges from last night, the sedative, the footage, that's the criminal side, and that moves at its own pace. What I need to manage for you is the civil side, whatever she accessed, whatever she planned, whatever documentation she might have gotten to. We need to build a wall around your assets before this investigation goes further." "How fast can we do that?" "I can have preliminary documents drafted by end of day Monday," he said. "Come into my office Monday morning. Bring Marcus if he's willing. Bring everything you have, bank statements, the loan request from 14 months ago, any text messages or emails that establish the pattern." "I have them," I said. A brief pause. "Of course you do," Howard said, with the tone of a man who had never actually doubted that. After I hung up, I sat with my coffee and I thought about what he'd said. The pattern. That was the word that mattered. Not just last night. Last night was dramatic and clear and documented. What mattered for the full picture was the pattern. The loan request. The Caldwell Estate seminar she'd attended without an invitation. The key she'd copied. The years of careful, patient access building dressed up as marriage. That pattern, laid out correctly, was its own testimony. And I had been keeping notes, not formally, not in any way I'd admitted to anyone, but in a small brown notebook I kept in the drawer of my nightstand that I had started 2 years ago when the unease stopped being vague and started being specific. Dates. Incidents. Exact words from conversations I'd written down afterward while they were still fresh. I had thought when I started that notebook that I was being paranoid, that I was the difficult mother-in-law building a case where there was none. I got up, went to my nightstand, and took out the notebook. 47 pages of dates and notes. 2 years of watching and writing and saying nothing. I held it in my hands and I felt the weight of it. The weight of all that silence, all that careful observation, all those nights I'd written something down and then gone to sleep wondering if I was wrong. I hadn't been wrong, not once. I put the notebook in my bag to bring to Howard on Monday. Marcus called at 8:30. He sounded like a man who had also not slept, but was functional. The specific register of someone running on necessity and adrenaline and the practical momentum of having things that needed to be done. Mom, I talked to a lawyer last night, a friend from work who practices family law. She says I need to move on the joint accounts today before the banks open for regular business hours because Howard said the same thing, I said. I'll meet you at First Meridian at 9. Okay, a pause. How are you? I'm standing, I said. You? Same. Another pause, longer. I called Daniel Park this morning. That surprised me slightly. How did you get his number? His brother. I texted Brian last night. He breathed. Daniel doesn't remember much from after the toast. His brother said he's okay, that the doctors cleared him, that he's going home this morning. A beat. He asked how you were. Something moved in my chest. He asked how I was, I repeated. He said, and this is a direct quote, "Tell Mrs. Mercer she was probably the most competent person in that room last night, and I hope she's okay." Marcus's voice had something in it that wasn't quite humor, but was adjacent to it. The wry, exhausted something that surfaces when grief and absurdity arrive at the same moment. I didn't know what to say to that. Tell him I said thank you, I said, and that I'm sorry his night ended the way it did. I already did, Marcus said. He said not to apologize. He said you didn't pour the drink. A pause. He's a good kid. He is, I said. He's going to be a good man. We were quiet for a moment, just the two of us on the phone, in the morning, the way we used to be before everything got complicated. Mom, he said, I went through some of our financial records last night. After you left, I couldn't sleep, so I started looking. His voice shifted, got quieter, darker. The investment, the $60,000 I asked you for. She told me it was a real estate partnership that had gone bad. I believed her. I never looked at the actual documents. I waited. There were no documents, he said. I mean, there were documents, but they're not what she said they were. The company doesn't exist the way she described it. The partner she named, I can't find him anywhere. I think, he stopped. I think the money went somewhere else. The silence between us had the weight of a stone. How much? I said. I don't know the full number yet, but it's more than the 60. He exhaled. A lot more. She had access to accounts I didn't check regularly. I trusted her with a lot, Mom. I closed my eyes for a second. Okay, I said. We bring all of that to Howard on Monday. Every record you can find. There might be more I don't know about yet. I know. We find out what there is, and we deal with what's there. I kept my voice steady, the same way I had kept it steady in every hard room for 40 years. Not because I wasn't afraid of what the number might be, but because steady was the only thing that was useful right now. Marcus, this is solvable. It's going to be hard, and it's going to take time, and it's going to make you angry in ways you haven't even hit yet, but it is solvable. How do you know? Because I have been broke before, I said. Real broke, not worried about investments broke, but buying off-brand cereal and hoping the car makes it to Friday broke. And I rebuilt from that. We can rebuild from this. I paused. Also, she is going to be held accountable for what she took, and that matters for the recovery. This isn't just a loss, there's a legal case here. He was quiet. Then, when were you broke? You never told me that. You were 7, I said. You were busy with second grade. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. Broken at the edges, but there. Okay, he said. First meridian at 9. I'll be there. The bank was first, then an emergency call with Howard by phone to outline the steps, then a long afternoon at Marcus's kitchen table, his kitchen, not the house he'd shared with Vanessa, who had moved out by the time we arrived because her sister had apparently come to collect her things while we were at the bank, going through 3 years of financial records that Marcus had printed and stacked in mismatched piles that told their own story of a man who had been deliberately kept away from his own finances. I did not say I told you so. I want to be clear about that. I have never in my life said those 4 words, and I was not going to start. What would have been the point? Marcus knew. He knew in a way that was going to take a long time to fully process, and the last thing he needed from me was a reminder of all the moments I had seen what he hadn't. What he needed was a second set of eyes on the documents and someone who did not flinch when the numbers were bad. So I sat at his kitchen table, and I went through the records with him, and when the numbers were bad, I said, okay, noted, next, and we kept going. The picture that emerged over 4 hours was not simple. Vanessa had been moving money for at least 2.5 years. Small amounts at first, transfers that read, in isolation, as normal household expenses. Then larger ones routed through the failed investment entity, which turned out to be a shell, a company name, and a bank account, and nothing else. The $60,000 Marcus had asked me for had been intended to cover a gap she'd created and couldn't fill. When I'd said no, she'd found another way to fill it, which had created a new gap, which had led to new measures. It was a house of cards that had been wobbling for months. The retirement party, the plan to incapacitate me, access my documents, influence my estate planning in the window before I had new legal protections in place, had been a last move, a desperate one. She had been running out of runway, and she had looked at my retirement and seen the last available door. She needed you out of the way, Marcus said. He had been staring at a spreadsheet for 10 minutes without speaking. Not permanently, just for long enough, to get to the right accounts, to get someone to sign something. Yes, I said. He pushed the spreadsheet away. He pressed both palms flat on the table and looked at the wall. She could have just asked me, he said. If she was in trouble, if things were this bad, she could have just told me, and we could have... He stopped. No, we couldn't have, because it would have meant telling me the truth about where the money went, and that was the thing she couldn't do. Asking for help would have meant giving up control, I said, and control was the only thing she was ever actually managing. He turned that over. I watched him put it somewhere. The divorce is going to be ugly, he said. Probably, I said, but it will end. How long? I don't know. Howard will tell you more. But Marcus, the ugliness of the process doesn't change what's on the other side of it. I looked at him. On the other side of it is your life. Yours, not a version of it she's managing. Yours. He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were tired and red and 20 years older than they'd been at the start of the previous evening. I don't really know who I am, he said, without all of this, without the version she was running. No, I said, you don't, not yet. I held his gaze. But finding out, that's not a loss, baby. That's the whole point. 3 weeks later, Daniel Park called me. He had gotten my number from Patricia, who had apparently decided on her own that the call should happen and facilitated it without telling either of us she was doing so. That was also Patricia. 22 years of decisive, quiet competence. Mrs. Mercer, Daniel said. He sounded fully recovered, the easy, earnest voice of the young man who had told me my reports had shaped his career. I hope it's okay that I called. It's more than okay, I said. How are you? I'm good. I'm really good, actually. A pause. I don't really know what I wanted. My brother said I should call. He said you'd want to know I was okay. Your brother was right, I said. I'm very glad you're okay, Daniel. Mrs. Mercer. His voice shifted slightly. More serious. I found out what happened. The full thing. My brother told me. A beat. I found out that the glass was... that it was yours, that you switched it. I didn't say anything. I just need to say, I know it wasn't... You didn't put anything in my drink. That wasn't... I'm not saying that. I know what happened. He was speaking carefully, the way young people speak when they're trying to say something that feels too large. I just need you to know that I don't carry any bad feeling about that night. About you, I want you to know that." I sat with that for a moment. "Daniel," I said, "what happened to you that night was wrong. It was not your fault, and it was not mine to fix, but it happened in the same space as something I was trying to manage, and you got caught in it, and I am sorry for that. I need you to hear that." "I hear you," he said. "And Mrs. Mercer, the guys at the office told me that you're the one who made sure the glass was preserved, that you told security before anyone knew what had happened, that you basically handed the police a complete case before they even got there." "I had help," I said. "That's not what they said." A small laugh. "They said you ran the whole thing like a project manager running a crisis response." He paused. "They said it like it was the most Evelyn Mercer thing that had ever happened." Something loosened in my chest. Not grief this time. Something warmer. "Those are my people," I said. "They are," he agreed. Then quietly, "I want to be that kind of person. The kind who notices things and doesn't panic. The kind who thinks while everyone else is just reacting." "You will be," I said. "Give yourself time." We talked for another 10 minutes. About his recovery, about what came next for him, about a new project he was leading at work that he was nervous about. I listened the same way I had listened for 40 years to young people finding their footing, and I gave him what I had always given: honest feedback, no false comfort, and the clear conviction that he was more capable than he knew. When we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet of my house, and I thought about continuity, about the things we pass forward without meaning to. Not just skills or knowledge, but a way of being in hard rooms, a way of not flinching, a way of trusting yourself when the room is telling you not to. I had carried that from somewhere. My mother, probably. A woman who had worked 2 jobs and never once acted like the world owed her the basic dignity she was entitled to. She had taught me to stand still when things were frightening. She had taught me to keep my face clear and my eyes open. She had taught me, without ever using these words, that the most powerful thing a woman can do in a room that doesn't expect her to prevail is to simply refuse to lose. I had passed some version of that to Marcus. He didn't know it yet, but I had watched him at the bank, at the kitchen table, on the phone with his lawyer, watched him start, slowly, to trust his own reading of things again. It would take time. The architecture of someone like Vanessa doesn't come down overnight, but it comes down. And now, apparently, some version of it had also reached Daniel Park, who was 28 and wanted to be the kind of person who thought while others reacted. Things move forward, even from the worst nights, especially from those. What? The charges against Vanessa were formally filed 6 weeks after the party. Howard called me when it happened. He read them to me over the phone in his precise, unhurried way. Criminal endangerment, administering a substance without consent, financial fraud, intent to defraud. That last one tied to the shell company and the missing money, which the investigation had continued to excavate well beyond what Marcus and I had found at the kitchen table. The full number, when the forensic accountants finished, was $214,000. I sat with that number for a long time. $214,000. Taken over 2.5 years from a man who loved her through a system of small moves and careful misdirection and the strategic management of his trust. Taken from a family that had given her everything she asked for and then been positioned as the obstacle when she decided she needed more. I felt the anger again when I heard that number. I am not going to pretend I didn't. I am 63 years old and I have worked too hard for too long to be serene about the deliberate theft of $250,000 from my son. The anger was real and it was appropriate, and I let myself feel it without turning it into something I acted on. Because here is what I have learned. Across 63 years of living and 40 years of navigating rooms where the odds were not always in my favor, the difference between justice and revenge is not emotional. It is directional. Justice moves the situation forward. Revenge circles it. And I had never been a woman who circled. I chose forward. I chose accountability through the right channels, documentation over dramatics, my son's recovery over any satisfaction I might have gotten from a public unraveling. I chose it not because I am a saint. I am absolutely not a saint. But because I understood clearly what would actually make things better. And making a scene would not have made things better. Building the case did. Vanessa entered a plea agreement 4 months later. I was not in the room when it happened. I did not need to be. Howard called me afterward and told me the terms, and I listened, and I said thank you, and I hung up, and I went outside into my backyard where the garden I had been neglecting for 4 decades was finally getting some attention. I had taken up gardening in retirement, not because I had always wanted to. I had not, particularly, but because my hands needed something to do, and the garden needed someone, and it turned out that the two of us got along. I was on my knees in the dirt when Marcus called. "Mom." "I heard," I said. "Howard called." "How do you feel?" I sat back on my heels and looked at the bed of marigolds I had planted 3 weeks ago that were, against my cautious expectations, actually coming in. "Tired," I said honestly. "Relieved. A little," I tried to find the word. "Empty. Not sad, empty. Just, it's over, and my body doesn't know what to do with that yet." "Yeah," he said. "I know that feeling." We were quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that has earned itself, that has been through enough together that it doesn't need to be filled. "I've been seeing a therapist," Marcus said. "I've been going for about 6 weeks. This surprised me, but in the good way, the way of something you hoped for without saying so. "How is it?" I said. "Hard," he said. "Really hard. She says I have a lot of—" He laughed slightly. "She uses the word unlearning a lot." "That sounds right," I said. "She asked me about you, about us, about the last 6 years. He paused. "I told her that I lost my mother for 6 years without knowing I was losing her, because I was too busy being told what to see." I pressed my lips together for a second. "And what did she say?" I asked. "She said the fact that I could identify that now meant I was already doing the work." He paused again. "She also said that the relationship is only lost if both people decide to leave it, and that it didn't sound like you had left." "I didn't," I said. "I never did." "I know," he said. "I know that now. We made plans for Sunday dinner. Not at a restaurant, not at a party, not in any space with an audience or an occasion attached to it. Just dinner at my house, my kitchen table, the one with the water ring I've never bothered to have refinished, because it's been there since Marcus was 12, and it's part of the table now. He was bringing wine. I was making the pot roast I used to make when he was a teenager and the world was simpler. Some things get lost and don't come back. I have been around long enough to know that. Some damage has a shape that doesn't fully resolve. Some distances that open between people close in ways that work, but are never quite the same. I am not going to tell you Marcus and I sailed into a perfect mother-son sunset, because that is not what happened. And I do not believe in those kinds of endings. What happened was this. A 63-year-old woman sat in her garden on an afternoon in late spring with dirt on her hands and marigolds coming in, and her son's voice still warm in her ear, and she felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, that the future belonged to her, not to her fear, not to the management of someone else's scheme, not to the slow erosion of her own instincts by a woman who had looked at her life and seen nothing but a balance to be transferred. To her, her choices, her garden, her kitchen table with the water ring, her son coming for dinner on Sunday, her 47 pages of careful notes in a brown notebook that had helped put someone away, her retirement, which had not gone the way anyone planned and had ended up being something more honest and more hers than a party with cream roses and string lights could have captured anyway. I thought about what Daniel had said, the most Evelyn Mercer thing that had ever happened. I hadn't known, until he said it, that I had a reputation for that kind of thing, for noticing, for not panicking, for building the case instead of making the scene. I have spent a lifetime being underestimated by people who looked at me and saw a woman of a certain age with a certain manner and decided that composure meant passivity, decided that patience meant blindness, decided that because I did not shout, I could not fight. Every single one of them was wrong. Vanessa was the last one. I intended to keep it that way. I put my hands back in the dirt. The afternoon was warm. The marigolds, bright orange and stubborn as anything, were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. So was I. So was I.